I went down to the dim, echoing parking garage to wrestle with a stubborn trunk and a worse mood. My quiet neighbor, Robert, appeared with a flashlight and a steady voice. He said 7 words that stopped me cold, words I didn't know I needed to hear. What happened next turned a routine Tuesday into the first night I finally let the past set me free. Before I begin, I'd love to know who's listening tonight. Tell me in the comments which city you're watching from. Are you in Phoenix, Chicago, Miami, a small town in Kansas? I picture each of you in your own living rooms or kitchens, and it makes me feel like we're sharing this story together. It was one of those early evenings when the day can't decide whether it's over. The garage lights hummed like tired bees, and the concrete held the day's heat the way old hands hold memories, loosely but not without feeling. My sedan was parked in my usual spot, level B, right under a sign that forever rattled when someone's muffler coughed. I had a paper bag of groceries cutting into the crease of my elbow. My keys clinked like bracelets, and I was doing that awkward shoulder bump maneuver to nudge the trunk closed because the hydraulic struts have been getting lazy, like me after 3 p.m. coffee. I'm Linda, 52, suddenly aware that my eyes have learned to read warning labels before they read perfume notes, that my steps measure distance more than time. I live alone on the 6th floor, 2 doors down from Robert, the neighbor with the rolling tool cart and a smile that always felt borrowed from someone else. We nod in the hallway, exchange polite weather observations, and have the kind of familiar silence that grows between people who are careful with their stories. That night, the trunk refused to latch. I pulled. I pressed. I whispered the kind of negotiations we make with stubborn objects when we don't want to be heard bargaining with ourselves. A faint draft snuck under my collar. Somewhere, a car door slammed and sent a bird-winged echo spiraling up the concrete columns. Need a hand, Linda? The flashlight beam landed near my shoes and then skated up the bumper. He came into view like the second part of a sentence. Steady, expected once it arrived. Robert, in a navy work jacket, a faint scent of motor oil and dryer sheets, held the light low so it didn't blind me. I'm all right, I said, which was only partly truthful. It's just got opinions. He smiled. Trunks and people. Both want to be understood more than fixed. I huffed a little laugh, then stepped back so he could take a look. He set the flashlight on the concrete, light upward, allowing the underside of the trunk in a soft circle. His hands were clean, but I imagined them dirty often, that kind of honest dirt that comes from making and mending. Here, he said, press when I say press. He nudged the latch with a key. Press. The trunk slid down, met the latch, bounced with a stubborn shrug. It's been doing that all week, I said. I've been tying it with a bungee cord like some kind of roadside magician. May I? He looked up at me, and when I nodded, he slipped into my space the way a careful song enters a quiet room. He peered closer, thumbs gentle around the rubber trim. The catch is misaligned. It wants patience. Patience. I have known patience so long it feels like a second spine, waiting for the kettle to whistle, for the doctor to call, for grief to make room for ordinary days. Watching the calendar squares flip like stoic cards, being brave on a schedule. We tried again. He adjusted the catch a fraction. Press. The trunk met the latch with a clean, satisfying click that echoed like good punctuation. I exhaled. Well, look at that. He stepped back, palms open. Not everything is broken. Sometimes it's just tired. Are we still talking about trunks? His eyes flickered with the ghost of a smile. Maybe. We stood there, the silence expanding just enough to make space for more truth than small talk usually allows. I heard the soft whir of the garage fan, felt the breath of air it pushed across my ankles. The fluorescent light above us buzzed and flickered, casting everything in a kind of persistent afternoon. "Thank you," I said. "It wasn't only for the trunk." "You're welcome." He shifted his weight like someone choosing a careful next step. "Do you have time for another tiny fix?" I tilted my head. "For the car? Or for me?" "Both, if you'll let me." He nodded toward my passenger door. "Your tire pressure light's been on since Friday. I noticed when you drove in." "You noticed?" It came out more surprised than I intended. He cleared his throat, eyes steady but kind. "I pay attention. It's a habit I picked up when Like started talking in undertones." He asked if I'd pull just a few feet forward to reach the air hose near the wall. I did. The hose rattled like a stubborn snake as he unwound it, checked my tires, knee to concrete, forearms balanced on his thighs. I watched, not because I didn't trust him, but because it felt like a ceremony. This simple maintenance under a humming light, the two of us creating a small harbor in a public place. The gauge hissed. "Right rear's low," he said. "It's not an emergency, just a whisper." I stood with my hands tucked into the sleeves of my cardigan. I've been ignoring whispers lately. "Whispers are where the truth starts," he said, not looking up. He topped off the air, replaced the caps, and stood, joints unfolding with the clean geometry of a practiced motion. The hose ticked as it exhaled the last of its pressure. My heart did something similar. "Linda," he said then, voice softer than the garage deserved, "can I say something that may sound forward?" The request itself felt like an act of respect, the opposite of every rude interruption that had ever barged into my life uninvited. I nodded, surprised at the trust in my own neck. He slid his hands into his pockets, not hiding, just anchoring himself. He looked at me fully, not past me, not around me. "You don't have to be brave alone." 7 words, simple, ordinary, the kind you might cross-stitch or print on a coffee mug, until you hear them said to you and realize they're not decoration at all. They are permission. The garage suddenly went bigger and smaller at the same time. Bigger because the world had room for me to lean. Smaller because it placed the two of us into a circle where the air felt different. I swallowed. My eyes did that strange hot-cold thing tears do when they're trying to find whether it's safe. "That's a kind thing to say," I managed. "It's surprising." He gave a small nod. "I'm a man who fixes things for a living. Sometimes that makes me forget some things don't want a wrench. They want a witness." I rested my palm on the cool roof of my car. The metal was firm, indifferent. My voice, when it came, threaded its way carefully. "I've been carrying a lot quietly." "I know," he said. "I mean, I don't know the details. I've just seen the way you come home, the way you hold yourself together even at the mailbox. If I'm wrong, tell me. I can take it." "You're not wrong." It felt like standing at the edge of a pool and finally deciding the water wouldn't swallow me whole. Losing someone teaches you to budget oxygen. He nodded again, slow, respectful. "I'm sorry for what you've lost." We let the apology sit on the concrete between us like a lit candle. No fuss, no wind to blow it out. A car rolled past on the far lane, tires whispering on smooth cement. The driver didn't look our way. "Do you have a minute?" he asked. "I've got a thermos of decent coffee in the truck. It tastes like the kind of diner we both miss." I smiled, something loosening in my chest like the moment a crowded drawer finally closes. "Decent coffee, you say? You make a bold promise, Robert." "Boldness isn't my usual mode," he said, already fishing the small metal thermos from his pickup's passenger seat. But tonight feels like it can hold it. He poured into the cap cup and handed it to me with the two-handed care you use for babies and heirloom plates. The coffee was hotter than I expected, softer than it smelled. He leaned against the bed of his truck, leaving a polite distance that could be crossed by words alone. We drank, and the heat threaded its way up into my cheeks. The thermos went back and forth between us, a small brass baton in a relay we hadn't planned to run. "Do you ever listen to music in here?" I asked, gesturing at the garage. "When it's quiet like this, I mean." He clicked his tongue thoughtfully. "Sometimes, when I'm late getting home and the day's still rattling around in my toolbox." "Why?" "There's a song that keeps finding me," I said. "In the produce aisle, in the elevator, everywhere. It doesn't make me cry. It just puts my spine back in place." He reached into the truck and turned the dash. The radio glowed in that warm, nostalgic amber. He scanned until the soft edges of an old tune floated out, strings like a deep breath, a gentle drum like a kind heart. It wasn't my exact song, but it had the same bones. He stepped away from the door, letting the music spill into the garage. It swam around us, softened the corners of the world. I could feel the bass in the soles of my shoes. "May I ask another forward thing?" he said, voice nearly at the song's volume. "Not a fix, just a favor." "Ask." He looked at my hands, then back at my face. "Would you like someone to stand next to you for a minute? No talk, no fixing. Just not alone." He said it like a man asking permission to set down a fragile package where it wouldn't break. I looked at the open space beside me, at the concrete scuffed by a dozen stray tires. I thought about how long it had been since standing next to someone didn't come with an agenda or a story I had to manage for both of us. Then I nodded, the kind of nod that lives in more than the neck. "Yes," I said. "I would." He moved slowly, giving me time to change my mind, to place the coffee down, to breathe. He stood close enough that our shoulders felt the same draft, and far enough that everything in me could choose. The song gave us permission to be quiet. The garage watched without commenting. It wasn't a dance. It wasn't a hug. It was two people making a small, respectful shape in a world that can be loud and careless. We watched the radio's orange glow count the seconds. His shoulder rose and fell with steady, unshowy breaths. Mine began to match. After a while, the song ended, and the radio hummed the nothing between stations. We stayed where we were for a few more beats, because ending a good moment deserves its own silence. Then he stepped back, not away, and handed me the thermos cap. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For letting me stand next to you." His smile was not a rented one now. It belonged to the moment. It's a gift when someone trusts you with their quiet. People think big speeches fix things, but sometimes it's the company that repairs the hinge. I laughed softly. "You and your hinges." "Occupational hazard." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Linda, if you'd rather keep this in the garage, we can. No pressure. But if you ever want a neighbor who checks your tire light without making a scene, I'm 2 doors down." I thought of the long hallway upstairs, the carpet that muffled footsteps. I pictured my door, the weight of my keys, the way I sometimes jingled them to pretend someone would answer. "I'd like that," I said. "I don't promise parties, but I can promise honesty. Honesty is the kind of party I show up for." We put the thermos away. He coiled the air hose like a gentle leash, and I thanked him with more of my face than my words. He opened my car door like chivalry hadn't gone out of style. I told him that was unnecessary. He did it anyway for the door and asked permission with his eyes for me. I slid into the driver's seat, hands finding the familiar groove at 10 and 2, only now it felt less like steering and more like choosing. He tapped the roof twice, an old mechanic's benediction, and stepped back. I put the car in gear, eased to the exit ramp, and paused at the red stripe where the world of the garage ends and the street begins. In the rearview mirror, his figure stood under the humming light, a good sentence at the end of a long paragraph. At the stop sign, I realized my mouth was curved upward, not in a grin, not in a smirk, but in a small anchored smile that felt built rather than painted. You don't notice how heavy an evening is until someone shares the handle. I drove a few blocks just for the feel of it, past the florist with the neon tulip, past the diner Robert's coffee had reminded me of, past a pair of teenagers taking pictures under a mural that made their faces look like cartoons. The city breathed with me. By the time I circled back to the building and parked again, this time the trunk behaved as if it had grown manners. I felt ready to carry my bag upstairs without thinking it would swallow my arm. In the elevator, my reflection looked back at me with new arithmetic. Grief minus isolation, bravery plus witness, loneliness divided by 2. On 6, the doors opened with a practiced sigh. The hallway lights warmed the carpet like a quiet sun. I paused outside my door, hand on the knob, and said the 7 words out loud, as though speaking them might set them into the paint. You don't have to be brave alone. I think that's when I decided not to be rescued. No one gets to do that work for you. Not to start some grand romance on the spot, just to let a good neighbor be what he offered to be. To accept that the opposite of loneliness isn't a party. It's company. It's the sound of a toolbox rolling gently past your door on a Tuesday evening and knowing you can open yours too. I turned the key, stepped inside, and set the groceries on the counter. The paper bag made that soft, settling sound paper makes when it knows it's done its job. I poured a glass of water and sat by the window where the city kept its quiet promise. When my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, I knew before reading it that it would be simple and to the point. It was Robert. If you ever want the hinges on that trunk aligned properly, I can help this weekend. No rush. Also, I make better coffee when I'm not in a parking garage. I smiled, typed slowly, and hit send. Thank you. I might take you up on both. And thank you for the quiet tonight. You know those moments that don't announce themselves but leave you different anyway. That was mine. In a humming, ordinary garage, with a repaired trunk and a bar of song, someone said the right 7 words at the right time. And even though nothing dramatic happened, no fireworks, no sudden thunderclap, something did happen. It was unexpected and deeply felt, and most of all, chosen. If you're still with me, remember to tell me where you're watching from. I like imagining the map of all of you. Alice, Portland, Detroit, places I've only seen in postcards. Tonight, I'm here in my little corner, surprised at how much lighter a Tuesday can feel when someone offers to stand next to you. And as for what happened next, well, the weekend arrived sooner than I expected, and with it, a different kind of bravery I didn't know I had. The weekend arrived like a small test of everything I had told myself I was ready for. Saturday mornings usually meant me, my slippers, and the quiet rhythm of coffee dripping into a mug while I scanned through old photographs I promised I'd finally organize. But that morning there was a gentle knock on my door, steady, not hurried, as if Robert knew exactly how much noise to make for someone who values peace more than surprise. When I opened it, he was there in his navy jacket again, a toolbox in one hand and a fresh thermos in the other. His smile was warmer than the hallway light. I figured I'd take a look at that trunk hinge properly. And he lifted the thermos, this time, coffee brewed under a roof, not in a garage. Both sound like good offers, I said, stepping aside. I don't often let neighbors into my home, but the way he stood there, patient, with no rush in his eyes, made it feel like the safest decision I'd made in a while. The apartment smelled faintly of lavender from the candle I'd burned the night before. I'd forgotten I'd left the photo boxes scattered on the table, their edges curled with years of being shuffled around. Robert noticed them but didn't comment. He simply set the toolbox down and handed me a mug of coffee before crouching near the photos like they were just part of the room's natural landscape. "This is good," I said after the first sip. Strong, not bitter. Comforting, like diner coffee remembered from the road trips of my 20s. "I promised better than garage coffee," he said with a chuckle. Glad I didn't oversell it. He went to work on the hinge soon after, and I followed him down to the garage with the kind of anticipation you feel when you're walking into something familiar that might turn into something new. The garage was cooler this time, with the sun higher outside and the fluorescent lights less necessary. He spread his tools with the easy confidence of a man who had been doing this his whole life. As he worked, he explained what he was doing, not in a patronizing way, but like a teacher who respects the student enough to share the craft. "This piece here," he said, pointing to the hinge, "was holding the weight all wrong. It's like shoulders carrying grief. Eventually one side slumps if the load isn't shared." I leaned against the car, watching the rhythm of his hands, the way he paused to listen to the metal as though it could answer him back. "You talk about cars like they're people." "Maybe because people are harder to fix," he said, not looking up. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was the kind that fills a room with understanding. I thought of the boxes of photos waiting upstairs, the stories I hadn't told anyone in years, the pieces of my life that felt too fragile to share. And yet, here I was, listening to the sound of a socket wrench and realizing my quiet wasn't as unbreakable as I thought. When he finished, the trunk closed with the kind of certainty you don't question twice. He dusted his hands, stood, and smiled at me. "There you go. No more bungee cords." I laughed softly. "You've saved me from looking ridiculous in the grocery store parking lot. You deserve more than patchwork solutions, Linda." He said it plainly, not like a compliment, but like a fact he wanted me to remember. We stood there a little longer, sipping coffee, listening to the faint hum of a car somewhere above us. And then he said something I wasn't expecting. "You know, I was married once. A long time ago. She passed before we figured out how to grow old together. I thought I'd buried the idea of company with her." I looked at him carefully. His eyes were steady, but his voice carried a softness that asked not for pity, but for recognition. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. He nodded. "I tell you that because when I see you walking down the hall, holding yourself together, I recognize the weight. And I think maybe neither of us has to carry it quite so tight. Something in me loosened then, the way a knot finally gives when you stop pulling against it. I found myself saying what I hadn't planned to share. My husband's been gone almost 5 years now, and I still set 2 plates at dinner sometimes. Not on purpose. It's just muscle memory. Then I put one back in the cabinet and pretend it doesn't sting." His expression didn't change into shock or sorrow. It just held me, held my words, the way a wall holds up a roof without needing to make a speech about it. "That's not ridiculous," he said. "That's love refusing to leave quietly." For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel embarrassed for being vulnerable. I felt understood, seen in the kind of way that doesn't demand you change, but lets you breathe as you are. We walked back up to the 6th floor together, carrying the toolbox between us like a shared anchor. At my door, I paused, then turned the knob wider. "Would you like to come in? I was going to make lunch. Nothing fancy. Just soup and bread." His eyes softened, that quiet smile appearing again. I'd like that. Inside, the boxes of photos waited, but instead of feeling like clutter, they suddenly seemed like invitations. As I stirred the soup and he set the table, we slipped into an ease that surprised us both, laughing about small things, telling stories about neighbors, sharing the kind of truths that only surface when two people decide silence doesn't need to be lonely. At one point, he glanced at the photos and asked gently, "Do you want to tell me about them?" I hesitated. Then I picked one up, the two of us, young and sunburned at a beach decades ago. I told him about the way my husband used to sing off-key in the car, how he always packed too many snacks, how he'd wink at me in the middle of the grocery store, as though he had a secret no one else knew. Robert listened without interrupting, without trying to fix the ache in my voice. He just listened, and in that I felt lighter. The soup simmered, the bread warmed, and the afternoon stretched into the kind of quiet that feels like a gift. I realized then that what Robert had given me wasn't just a repaired trunk or even shared coffee. It was permission to carry my memories without them crushing me. To let companionship exist alongside grief, not in place of it. By the time he left, the hallway light had softened into evening. He stood at my door, toolbox in hand, and said, "Thank you for lunch, and for trusting me with your stories." I touched the door frame, steadying myself. "Thank you for standing next to me when I needed it most." We said goodnight, and I closed the door gently, not with finality, but with the sense of something beginning. I leaned against the wood, my heart both calm and full. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was walking back into an empty apartment. I felt like I was walking into a space that still had room to grow. And as I put the dishes away, I thought about those 7 words again. You don't have to be brave alone. Words spoken in a parking garage that had followed me into my kitchen, into my stories, into my sense of possibility. That night, as I turned off the lights and sat by the window, I realized something important. Healing doesn't always arrive with thunder or grand declarations. Sometimes it arrives with the quiet knock of a neighbor, a cup of coffee, and the willingness to share silence. And sometimes that's all it takes to begin again.